Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I am
Gosh,
so
yeah.
excited to be here and be part of your podcast. Love it. Love everything
Oh,
you're
thank
doing. So thank you.
you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to have you here too. Mallory and I have known each other for, I don't even know how long, like a number of
Too
years.
many years.
Yeah, like maybe a couple handfuls of years.
Yeah, I usually, when the teens I work with ask me how old I am, I'm always like old enough. So I'll say we've known each other long enough.
Long enough. Yes. Yes. And, over those years, I've just loved watching Mallory build her business and create content and gathering spaces and conversations for teens and their parents too, I think that are just like so super important and helpful. So I'm just so thrilled to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that when I was a teen, coping skills, emotions, learning, who you are, all of these conversations that you have with folks, I would have so benefited from. So my inner teen is like,
Same.
yes, yes. So I think that this is going to be a really wonderful conversation talking about coping skills and emotions. And yeah, therapists love talking about coping skills. So I'm excited to get nitty gritty.
Yeah, it's interesting because coping skills are such a prominent part of what we do, and yet I never even really heard about them or like specifically until I was out of grad school
Yeah.
practicing, and I'm like, this needs to be out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we dive into all of that, I'd love to ask you, since the name of our podcast is Reclaim You, what does reclaim you mean to you?
Oh, I love this question. So I would definitely say, when I hear of Reclaim You, I really think it's about going back to like your core, like who you are. And I know we go through different phases and entities of, especially in the teenage years, of trying on different identities and facets, but really it's like your core values, the core of who you are is going to stay the same. And how can you get back there and align with that intuition and like what's best for you,
Yeah.
regardless of what other people are saying. You can definitely take that as input and feedback, but ultimately being able to like get back to you, what's right for you, your choices, like that's what I think of when I hear reclaim you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. And I know that a lot of times, like intense emotions and really like pervasive thoughts can get in the way of all of those things, which is why coping tools are like just so important, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. And I think there can be, like you said in grad school, I don't think that we learned how, right? Like what were coping tools? I don't know. We didn't learn these things. And so when we start talking about them with clients or even folks who are just like looking for support in the world, when we say these things, it can be really kind of confusing. There can be a lot of jargon around it. So can you just give us a bird's eye view? Like what are coping skills? How can they help you? Let's start there.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. Coping skills is still like one of those like jargony things that if you're
Uh-huh.
not in the mental health world, sometimes people are like, huh, it is getting a little more mainstream. I would love it to
Mhm.
be as mainstream as mindfulness and self-care. That's my
Yeah.
mission. It's
Yeah.
a key component. But a lot of times when people hear coping skills, they misinterpret it that it's going to solve the problem. And
Sure.
sometimes it can. But coping skills are really all the things that you are already doing and
Hmm.
could be doing to help you hang in there through an intense or uncomfortable emotional experience. So it doesn't necessarily end or change the emotional experience. It can, but its intention is to help you really survive it, which all of us have been doing our whole lives.
Yes. Yes, surviving. So I'm curious, how would you say that a coping tool is working for you, or even if it isn't working for you, then what?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of the teens that I work with, they come in and they say, coping skills don't work for me. And I'm like, well, that's impossible because you're here talking and breathing.
Right.
So
You have survived.
um,
Yes, you have survived.
yeah, yeah. And I think a few common mistakes is that people stop at one coping skill and you've got to match it to the intensity of the situation and the problem. It's like if you have a vehicle that runs on gas, your gas tank has like X number. Let's say I'm like horrible with math and things, so this is
Me too.
probably not a great metaphor for me to use, but just for easy math, let's say it has like 10 gallons in the tank. right? That'd be a tiny car. But so if you are running on 1 gallon of gas in that tank, you still have 9 more that you can reach to maximum capacity.
Mm,
So if your situation or your experience is so intense and so uncomfortable and you need to fill up, it's going to take more than like one like extra gallon of gas or one coping skills to reach that full tank. And so with coping skills, we talk a lot about, you need to have usually more than one. And also to match the coping skill or strategy to the situation. You want the right tool for the right circumstances. So if one of your coping skills is playing basketball, like it just helps you re-regulate and like works your nervous system, and you feel good because you feel accomplished because you're like a basketball all-star or whatever. That's a great coping strategy and absolutely is a coping skill, but it's not going to be applicable if you're taking a math test. Most math teachers aren't going to let you stop your math exam, go to the gym, shoot some hoops, and then come back and finish the test.
yeah. No, it's reminding me of, a lot of folks that we work with in our practice are struggling with, disordered eating or binge eating or things like that. And you're right, like having the one coping skill, because sometimes binging can be a coping skill, right? But to have more to lean on when you're feeling like overwhelmingly distressed. So yeah, matching the skill to the situation, that does feel so important.
Yeah, and you bring up an excellent point too. There are a lot of things that can help us cope. With therapy, we're trying to give you healthier alternatives and options, and it's not a one size fits all. Like I know for me, for deep breathing, it works wonders for me, but I can't do it silently. My brain
Mm.
just goes wild. So
Uh-huh.
I literally have to make that like noise when you breathe out to
Uh-huh.
help me focus.
Yep.
Just
Yep.
figuring out what works for you too, and not just,
Yeah.
just because it works for a therapist or for another client or your friend doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So trial and error a little bit until you figure that out. Keep assessing and reassessing, because what worked for you well in one situation or at one point in your life may not work as well later in life or in a new situation.
Yeah, totally. And what do you think are some little like signs or tidbits that a coping skill could be working to support you?
Yeah. So you probably in your work use like a SED scale, a subjective units of distress scale, right?
Yep.
And so like typically with that, it's where you rate how uncomfortable or intense an experience is, usually physically, but it can be emotionally on a 0 to 10 scale, where I usually do like 10 is like the absolute worst. Like I'm ready to like crawl out of my skin. It's so uncomfortable. And 0 is calm, neutral, like, what are you talking about? There's like
Mhm.
nothing going
Like
on here.
totally cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I usually recommend, and this is something that I offer in the coping skills crash course as a resource. I have a worksheet and I have a walkthrough video on this as well, on literally targeting and checking in, doing a little mini body scan from like your head to your toes and just noticing, where does it feel most uncomfortable right now. And then once you've located that, and if you can't locate it, that's okay too. That's a sign. That's okay.
Mhm.
But if you can locate it, rating how uncomfortable or intense that distress is or that discomfort on that 0 to 10 scale. Use the coping strategy and check in after that coping skill. So if you're using deep breathing, taking a few deep breaths and then checking in 0 to 10, how uncomfortable or how intense is it now? And the goal is, how we know it's working is if it is the same, we've kept it from
Mhm.
growing. That's
Mhm.
a success.
So important. So important, right? I think we forget that
Yes.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. Or if it decreases, which is like, ultimate goal, right? But
Mhm.
the whole point of coping skills is to help us, because your emotions, they're going to cycle anyway. We don't always stay miserable. We don't always stay happy. We don't always stay angry. It's going to wax and wane anyway. This is
Mhm.
just helping us, like, put our seatbelt on for the ride so we
Mhm.
stay safe
Yeah.
along the way.
Love that. I love that. Do you feel like there's like a magic number? Because I always think of adding tools to a toolbox. I'm like, okay, like let's get out your toolbox of coping skills. What's in there? And a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, for a long time, I was like, I don't know. It's empty. So how many coping tools like to add to the toolbox? Is there a magic number, maybe different for everyone?
Yeah, so when I was training to be a therapist, we had consultation with somebody who was trained in dialectical behavior therapy at a
Mhm.
program that I worked at. And he drilled into us, and I don't know where the research is on this, but just my own anecdotal research and
Uh-huh.
for myself and others, I found, the magic number does line up with 6, 7, or 8. So
Mhm.
having like a range, a minimum of 6. If you can have a variety of 8, that's even better.
Mhm.
But it usually takes using about that many to hang in there until you can get to a more manageable level where you can problem solve from a clearer headspace.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And so that really does give you, if you have, a go-to number of like 8 coping skills in your little coping toolbox, it gives you a number to be able to match the coping tool to the situation or whatever overwhelm you're
Absolutely.
experiencing in different realms of your life. Do you have any tips on how to do that though? On how to, you mentioned it earlier with the math test and the basketball, right? It makes total sense. What are some other ways maybe that folks can match what's going to help them cope to a different situation that they might be experiencing?
Yeah, I love that question because it's like a great question aligned with all of this. Basically, so I'm trained in DBT or dialectical behavior therapy. I'm not technically adherent, so I'm DBT informed. I have to
Uh-huh.
be careful with that, but I use it to inform my practice. It's what I've worked with my whole time being a therapist, and I love the way that they break down coping skills. So in that therapy model, they call them distress tolerance skills, but their coping skills is just rebranded
Yeah.
for DBT. What's great about it is that you can differentiate from the 4 different types of coping skills or distress tolerance skills, how to match the strategy to your situation. So
Mm,
there are distraction strategies. These are really, really great if you have like a sticky thought or feeling that like you just can't shake and you just need to kind of create some either physical, mental, emotional space from.
mhm,
Distraction's amazing for that. There are improving the moment strategies, which are all about mindset and changing how you are experiencing the thing that is happening right now. So these are really, really great. Like a few months ago, I got a flat tire while I was bringing a friend home from the hospital. So like
ugh,
all of this stuff is very stressful. I
ugh,
couldn't change the circumstances. I couldn't change the situation, but I used my improving the moment strategies to hang in there while I contacted AAA and they came out and did their thing and all was well. My friend ended up getting to their home healing, right? Like I
all the
got a new
important
tire.
things.
Yeah, but improving the moment strategies are really, really great for those circumstances. And
Cool.
then there are self-soothing strategies, which is great whenever your problematic approach to coping with stress is something that's more physically or activated with your nervous system. So this is really great if you struggle with self-harm or like any sort of eating conditions or something where it is like physically activating and uncomfortable. Crisis survival strategies. So these are when you've reached your tipping point, you just need immediate or quick relief, or you need to stop it from growing fast.
Mhm.
So this is really, really great if you're struggling with like panic attacks or like an extreme intense depressive episode or angry, like you're about to blow. It's also really great if you've already experienced a panic attack or, an angry explosion or something like that to help you re-regulate and get your nervous system back under control so that then you can use your thinking mind.
Uh-huh. Your wise mind.
Yes, love it.
I know, right? I have some DBT language sprinkled in there. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
That's super helpful. Do you think that you could give us maybe like an example of one or two of those in each category, each of the 4 categories that you mentioned?
Yeah, sure.
Or even
So,
like your favorite ones?
yeah, oh, they're all like my favorite. That's
Uh-huh.
like asking to choose your favorite child.
All of them for different reasons, right?
Exactly, exactly. That's a great answer. Yeah. So I think, I'll start with the crisis survival because that's just top of mind right now. But one of the things is pace breathing. And a lot of people, when we talk about pacing and breathing, deep breathing, slowing it down, like that's great. But another way that you can use pace breathing is, especially if you're having a panic attack, part of what is contributing to that is a feeling that you cannot breathe and you cannot control your breathing. So, an easier way or a more manageable way to get in control of your breathing, if you're trying to slow it down and that's just contributing to more stress, is to actually speed it up and then slow it down. So that's one thing for that category. For improving the moment, I would say, the first strategy that they talk about in there is imagery. I am somebody, I love guided meditations and visualization. I'm sure everybody knows who Michael Phelps is. He talks about how he personally and professionally uses visualization to win those gold medals. So
Yeah.
that's a great strategy. There is in the self-soothing strategies, it's really using any of your five senses or movement. And I've added, so this is not technically DBT, but I've added in creative expression because that's something that often comes up as a way of self-soothing and regulating your nervous system. So there's, the variety of ways you could do that. You could do that through dance, you could do that through pacing, stretching. And then in distraction, let me see, there's so many in there. So I would say, I'll talk about the comparing strategy because I do think this is one that gets misinterpreted a lot. Especially, I vividly remember being in English class and having that Venn diagram of compare and contrast. And
Yes.
it's always comparing to others or comparing to another situation, but that's not really the intention of the comparing strategy. It's really comparing your current experience to your past, previous, and your future. So taking a moment and acknowledging, like, okay, I'm here right now, but I haven't always been here. And like, here's evidence for that. Potentially also like remembering, like, okay, I'm here right now. This is great for therapy because sometimes you can feel like you hit a plateau and feel like, oh my goodness, like when is this going to be over? But remembering like you're working down that path, you're working down that trail, whatever it is, and like you are going somewhere and this is where you're headed to.
Yeah.
I could talk all these strategies all day.
All
We could be
day.
here like for a full like 8 hours.
Well, they're so helpful. They're really helpful. And what about like the folks that you work with? You work with primarily teens. How would you say they use this kind of stuff just like in their everyday life? Because like I said, like my inner teenager needed this stuff. So as an adult, I've had to kind of learn and grow and kind of feed that teenage self all of this information. And I think that's probably true for a lot of our listeners. Very similarly, not having this kind of support on the front end, now we're doing this work, as
Yeah.
adults in the world. So even thinking, like how the teens are using these type of skills in their everyday life, I think can be helpful for adults to say like, oh, well, yeah, I can do this too. This is important for me too.
Yeah. Well, I also, it's great that you're mentioning that because while I work primarily with teenagers, I mean, these are like not age specific.
Yeah.
These are like lifelong strategies. You're going to keep coming back to this, just like, you don't learn how to walk once when you're a toddler and then never use walking as
And
a
never
skill
walking
to
it.
get places.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like roll as a baby, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Like these are all things that you're foundationally using in building. And so even if you've never worked with a therapist and you've never heard of coping skills or anything, you already have coping strategies. You
yeah.
might not just be intentionally using them or knowing how to like name them or talk about them, but you're using them. So that's usually where we start in my sessions when we're working on coping skills is what have you already used that's already working? And then we go over, we call it psychoeducation in therapy, where we're explaining like this is a strategy, this is what it's called, this is how it can potentially be used, and these are some options. And then we personalize it to that situation. So, this is great for having difficult conversations. This comes up all the time with teenagers because they're constantly having to have difficult conversations, whether they are wanting to have it or they are in a position where like a parent wants to have it
Or
with
being
them.
invited into them. Yes.
Yeah, that's a nice way of saying that. So being able to use coping strategies before, during, and after an uncomfortable conversation is like one of the top ways that we see this.
Mm,
I professionally specialize in working with teens who struggle with some really hardy, difficult situations like dealing with self harm and suicidal thinking. So we definitely use that for this. And we will put this all together on what's called a coping ahead plan,
hmm
where we can recognize, what are the potential stressors or emotional vulnerabilities that can contribute to why we would need to use coping skills. That's great because then you
hmm
can like create a plan personal to that. We list out those like 6 to 8 options. So they're ready to go. And then, the rest of a coping ahead plan is like going through, okay, if that didn't work, what's the next step?
hmm
So we start with the coping skills, and then if that doesn't work, you move on to talking to a safe, responsible adult, not
hmm
another teenager.
Uh-huh.
Because
Uh-huh.
we never know what they're going towards, and not an unsafe adult because they exist too,
They sure
but
do.
somebody who's safe and responsible. And then it,
Yeah.
it just kind of goes from there.
Yeah. So obviously we can learn coping tools in therapy with our therapist in group settings. You run a lot of groups.
Yes, I love
How
group.
else though? I know that you have resources, right? You have lots of resources about coping skills. You're like the coping skill master. Tell us more about your resources and how else folks can kind of like lean into this work if maybe therapy isn't accessible or maybe they're taking a break from therapy, whatever it is. How else can folks kind of access this type of, knowledge and learning and practice?
Yeah, so during the lockdown portion of the pandemic, I know like it was tough to get in with a therapist if you weren't already involved with one. And so, being a therapist that like just wants to help everybody, I was like, how can I like make this more accessible? And so at that point, I created what's called the Coping Skills Crash Course. I'm probably going to be renaming it because originally it was like a 2 hour workshop, and now it's kind of morphed into more of like a mini lesson kind of
Cool.
program. But that program really just walks through all the foundations, all the different coping strategies, how to create a personalized coping ahead plan. And then we also have monthly live calls where we talk about applying coping skills to certain situations. So, like in November, we're going to be having a call on coping with families. And
Mm,
then in December, we're going to have a call on coping with overwhelm. So that's one way of doing that. And then I also have the self care bundle, which is a huge library of all sorts of self care resources that people can use because, coping skills are absolutely great. I definitely think they are like the meat, but like self care is going to like keep your maintenance.
yep.
So
Yep.
they got to go hand in hand. And that is a digital resource library of therapist approved and created strategies. I'm the therapist that created them.
Uh-huh.
So I know they work.
They work.
And the great thing about both of these programs is because they're created and intended as guided self help resources, they are not psychotherapy. So it doesn't mean that even though I'm a therapist, I'm not your therapist. So it's a great way to like quote unquote work with me without becoming a counseling client and
Mhm.
without being restricted by licensing laws. Because
Right.
as a psychotherapist in the United States, you have to be licensed by a particular state in order to practice with people who are physically there, even though in this virtual land, like you're in Pennsylvania, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm in Connecticut and we can talk, but if we were doing therapy, we wouldn't be able to do
We
this.
wouldn't be able to say, yeah. Yeah. Not on the record.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that feels so helpful. Is there anything else about coping tools that you feel like would be helpful to share?
Yeah, I definitely like cannot stress enough that, these are like lifelong strategies. So definitely take the time to assess and reassess, is this helping or is this hurting? Is this contributing to the relief that I'm seeking or is this contributing to another problem or creating a different problem? And it is totally okay to not do this alone. There are
Mm.
plenty of resources out there. I know you and your team are like amazing. I've been loving
Well,
the
thank you.
podcast, by the way.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
Location, whatever. I mean, we live in the land of YouTube and Google.
That's for
There
sure.
are so many resources out there. They will take you so far. It may take a little more effort because you
Mhm.
have to kind of sift through. But there's just so much information out there that even, low cost or free
Yeah.
exists.
Speaking of YouTube, why don't you tell everyone about where they can find you and more about your work? And I mean, just like spoiler alert, Mallory has a massive YouTube channel that's just like
Thank you.
amazing and so helpful. But yeah, tell everyone how to find you, what you've got going on, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I do have a YouTube channel. There are over 300 videos on there. So that's what I'm talking about. Like just me alone. There's a lot of resources. So you can definitely find me on there at Mallory Grimste. I have Instagram as well at my website. With every video, there is a blog post. If you prefer to read versus watch, you can definitely click over to there. And my practice is physically located in Woodbridge, Connecticut, though I'm licensed to provide psychotherapy with people in New York and Connecticut. We're not quite there yet. We're at like interstate compact where we can cross states, but those are the
Mhm.
locations that I can practice with if people are physically located there. And we offer both in office and telehealth. So you
Cool.
have options.
Amazing. Well, I
Thanks.
will link to your website and your YouTube channel, Instagram, all of the resources that you mentioned. I'll link to everything in the show notes so that folks can check them out and see what you've got going on because you've got so much good stuff out there. I think that people will really benefit from it.
Thank you so much. And if anybody has questions like after this or wants to get in touch with me, like please feel free to DM me on Instagram. I will do my best to get back to you. Just keep in mind, Instagram is not psychotherapy, so I can't do like counseling over Instagram, but I can help direct you to a great therapist if that's what you're looking for.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. So psyched that you were here and just really appreciate your wisdom and all the good work you're doing in the world.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you as well.
Aw, thank you. All right, everybody. So we will be back next week with another episode. And until then, take good care of yourself.